Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk a little bit more about Arcane, but also in regards to narrative consistency in the Runeterra IP. Now this is something that I touched on very briefly in my Arcane Act 2 review, which if you guys haven't seen that, go check that out if you're not trying to avoid spoilers. It is a very spoiler heavy video, so definitely keep that in mind. But this is something that I wanted to talk about because I do feel like with Arcane coming to a close and with more of the story being sort of revealed to us now than we have previously seen, I think it's an okay time to start having this conversation, especially in regards to where I kind of think Riot have messed up potentially with regards to how Arcane's been handled. Now, Arcane, if you guys haven't noticed at all, is massive. And I don't know that it's easy to explain just how big this is, right? Like, Arcane is huge. Like, this is something that has fashion brands collaborating with it, that has makeup brands collaborating with it, that has other games collaborating with it, that has releases across every single one of Riot Games' games, right? Like, everyone is getting a piece of the Arcane pie. Like, there were street signs advertising Arcane down in LA, which was absolutely crazy for me to see, because this is something that's based off a video game, right? Like, I know League of Legends has been big for quite some time, and it's not a surprise that if you're online at all that you are aware of League of Legends, but if you're not a very online individual, right, if you're just, you know, a random person on the street, you probably have never heard of League of Legends at all, or maybe you have, but in passing. So for League to finally have this level of collaboration and this level of involvement, this is bigger than it's ever been before, right? Regardless of how popular it was in the sort of video gaming sphere, this is something else entirely. And I think that's one of those things that really points to Arcane being a giant milestone for the development of not only the Runeterra IP, but also for Riot Games, and potentially for the future of video games as well. But maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves there. But here's my thing. I think one of the biggest issues I take with Arcane and with how Riot have handled it is that Riot have essentially dodged the question, or attempted to dodge the question, about is Arcane canon? Right? I think that's one of the questions that people have had, and Riot basically said, well, internally, yes, but narratively, no. And I feel like this is a mistake for multiple reasons. Now, I know I had this whole discussion about how things being canon or not canon isn't that big of a deal, because you do need to give the showrunners some degree of flexibility and freedom to tell their own story, which I think is totally fine. But also, I think that it doesn't make sense to have your biggest media release ever also not be canon, right? Can you imagine, for example, if Star Wars, right, the newest Star Wars movie or the newest Marvel movie came out and the XX halfway through, right, halfway through either the release cycle or halfway through the movie being out are like, so actually, this is not canon. Right? Like, can you imagine that? Like, that would never fly, right? There's no company in the universe that would say, hey, the newest movie that we just came out with, this is not actually real. This doesn't exist. Nothing that happens in this is canon, and there's another telling of the story that you're going to have to go find somewhere else. For example, you're going to go find this by playing our video game, or by going online and reading a half dozen stories or so to know what actually happens, right? Like, no one is going to do that in today's modern media age. And so because of this, and I think it's important to say that if Riot wants League of Legends, and especially the Runeterra IP, to be considered as one of the big ones, right, up there with stuff like Star Wars or like the MCU or any of those, right, if they want that to be a thing, then I think it is past time for Riot to have some degree and some sense of narrative consistency. I think it's okay if Riot have small retcons and tweaks every now and again to re-explain something, or to clarify something that existed previously, or to edit a champion's backstory to make sense with, potentially things that they've revealed about the universe. That was sort of fine, but I think that we're now past the point of Riot being able to freely retcon everything that happens in the Runeterra universe to suit their needs at the moment. Right? This is something that Riot have done throughout the Great Retcon, where they essentially say, well, we're going to go ahead and edit this thing in particular because, we have a new champion release and we want that to make more sense, or yada yada, that kind of a thing. And that was sort of fine back in the day when we were going through the Great Retcon and when we had all these big lore issues that were going on already that were being addressed and things were constantly changing. But I really feel like at this point, like, League of Legends has gotten into a point where the lore is very internally consistent, where they have sort of established the universe, where there are very few champions left that actually need to be updated to fit in with the new world. Shaco, I'm looking at you. But besides for him, right, almost everyone else has a place and exists in the universe, and every region has been fleshed out in a good regard, right? There's very little left for Riot to do. And at this point, I think that for Riot to say something is going to be non-canon or something is going to be changed from what it was previously, they need to have a damn good reason for doing it, and it can't just be, well, we don't want to piss off our lore fans with Arcane's direction, so instead we're just going to say, it's not canon, don't worry about it, guys, right? Like, that doesn't fly anymore because of how big it is, and because I think there's a lot of a need for consistency in your storytelling and consistency in your universe. This is one of the things that Riot talked about with their ASUs, where Riot were saying, right, the whole point, one of the points of an ASU is to make it so that champion appearances actually match across all of their IPs, right? This is something that was very small at first, right? Where, okay, Caitlyn looks slightly different in her League of Legends appearance versus in her Legends of Runeterra appearance. That's totally fine, whatever, it's a slightly different game, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But especially if Riot start doing reworks to champions, or especially visually updating champions. For example, if Tryndamere ever received a visual and gameplay update and starts looking very, very different from what he does before, he's going to look very different from what he looks like in Legends of Runeterra. If he's been in anything else, for example, if they do a show set in the Freljord, he may look even more different than that, right? There's, like, so much that I really feel like could potentially be a problem and prevents people from seeing this story, right, as legitimate. Because they're like, well, he looks totally different in there. And I think what needs to happen is Riot needs to start having some degree of consistency with how they display their characters, and some degree of consistency with the lore, I think, is the biggest thing for me, right? They need to be able to say, these are the canon events, this is the canon version of the story that we wanted to tell. There is no other story, right? Basically put up or shut up. And the reason for this is because that way you have people who can actually get interested and invested and know that they're not about to have the rug pulled out from under their feet, right? That way we're not asking the question when Arcane comes out, well, is this canon? Because this is contradicting stuff, right? What Riot needs is essentially they need someone or a team on the company whose job it is to ensure consistency, who can look at anything that Riot put out and say, does this match with everything we've done previously, right? Does this make sense from a lore perspective? Does this make sense from a character design perspective? Does this make sense with the universe that we've created and all the things that we've previously written? Because if you want this to be a big IP, if you want this to be one of the major players in the modern media industry, which I feel like is where Riot are trying to get at, then you need to have this degree of consistency. And for those of you saying, oh, well, that would be so hard for Riot to do, I disagree, because Brandon Sanderson, the author of the Cosmere novels, has somehow managed to be extremely consistent with not only things like just internal story events, but also with depictions of his characters, right? And this is a novel series, right? This could be very easily taken as artistic liberty or different things along those lines, and say, okay, this character, is going to look slightly different because it's a different artist actually doing the art this time, right? Like, there's so much that could have happened, and instead Sanderson has found a way to guarantee that no matter what the medium, no matter what the source, his characters are going to look the same every time, and the events of his stories are never going to change, right? Like, that is such a big deal for me that I don't feel like it's appropriate then for Riot, a multi-million-dollar company, to not have that level of consistency, to not have the ability to say, this is the canon version of the story, right? Like, or to release a story that has non-canon events in the first place, or to have a story that they have to say, okay, this isn't actually canon, right? Like, that I just don't think makes any sense, and I feel like it's something that Riot, if they want to be taken seriously, especially with how big Arcane has gotten, moving forward, they need to fight for consistency. They need to fight to guarantee that things play out the same every way, and that champions appear the same across all of their properties. I think that there's no excuse for it anymore, and it's something that I really hope Riot considers doing in the future. But those are my thoughts, guys. Go ahead and let me know what you think of any of this down in the comment section below. I know this was a bit of a rant and maybe a bit unclear at times, so let me know down in the comments if you have any questions, or if there's anything that I could explain a little bit better. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.